All right, so
Yeah.
welcome everybody that if you are a member of Susquehanna Group, we're happy to have you join us. And even if you're just a member of the public and you're not a member of Sierra Club, we encourage you to join, but you don't have to be a member to attend these meetings. And there are meeting recordings available on our website. If you search for Susquehanna Group Sierra Club Atlantic Chapter, you'll find our website and you'll find meeting recordings there. You'll find newsletters there. And we are having a river cleanup, which actually was organized by the Environmental Management Council of Broome County, but Susquehanna Group of Sierra Club is also registered and is fielding a team. So you're welcome to join that this Saturday, the 22nd, 9 a.m. meet at the south end of the Washington Street pedestrian bridge. So you would be happy if you could volunteer to help clean up the riverbanks in downtown Binghamton with us. And also part of it might be to help with the Confluence Park Garden, which Susquehanna Group helps to maintain and helped create and plant several years ago. What else? We have executive committee elections coming up. So if you're interested in trying to become a volunteer member of the executive committee to help lead and guide our Susquehanna Group locally, please turn in a candidate statement. I don't remember how many words you're limited to, but maybe Jim, can you mention when that's due and how many words they're allowed to provide?
As I recall, it's 150 words, and it's the due date is November 30th.
Okay.
And you can find the directions on any of the newsletters, and the newsletters can be found on the Sierra Club website under publications.
Yeah, and that's for the Susquehanna Group. So not the national website, but you have to get down to the Susquehanna Group website, which is our local group. We serve members in 6 counties now, stretching from Tioga County in the west to Sullivan County in the east, and we have over 1,000 members. So we don't have anybody yet for the upcoming meeting in next month in November as well as December, but we have some invitations out, so we're hoping to get responses and be able to announce our normal method by email and also on Facebook. And eventually when we get another newsletter out, it'll be in there too. So we're still trying to fill in. If people have ideas for presentations, speakers, please let us know. And you can do that by email or Facebook. So anyway, welcome to tonight's general membership meeting of Susquehanna Group of Sierra Club. I'm pleased to welcome our presenters tonight. Chris Berger, he's a long-term member, and he was also a member of the Broome County Legislature many years ago. He's an expert on reducing waste, recycling, those types of topics, but he's also now somewhat of at least through personal experience, an expert on electric vehicles and what they're like to drive and recharge and what is, what's involved in planning trips. And then we also have Larry Blumberg. I should mention that Chris Berger owns a Mustang Mach E built by Ford, and Larry Blumberg, he owns a Chevrolet Bolt. It starts with B as in boy. And then we also have Jack Davis, who has a Tesla Model Y. So all 3 of them will be sharing their personal experiences of what it's like to have an electric vehicle. Maybe they might mention something about what it was like to buy them and set up their home to charge at home and what it's like when they go on a trip somewhere, things to watch out for, weather related, temperature related, things like that, and how they're doing with costs. So think about questions while you're listening to them, and the latter part of this will be a question and answer session. So they're willing to answer people's questions the best they can. And thank you to Chris, Larry, and Jack. And I turn it over to Chris now. Thank you.
If I could just interject quickly, sorry, Chris, but I know we have a few other people who are either driving EVs or are very interested in getting one in the near future. So, well, of course, wanted to hear from well, but so yeah, Chris, it's all yours. You got the.
Okay, well, thanks. Yeah, when I pitched this to Valdi, I said, I think I'd like to basically make the presentation on what's it like to live with an EV. But I thought it'd be helpful to start off just to kind of give an overview of the, well, even an overview of zero waste, or zero carbon footprint in general, because if you recall, I can't remember how many months back, it's been a while, where I gave that talk, basically zero carbon footprint. And so some of these slides will look familiar. If you look at the overall US energy use, you'll see actually the biggest use is in the provision of the consumer products that we consume. And that's why I always tie this whole zero carbon footprint into recycling, because it turns out that there's a lot of energy to be saved if we just turn around how we use resources and just providing our general consumer goods. There's also obviously energy used to provide food, and a lot of focus is on building use, making our homes more efficient and doing that transition away from fossil fuels. But then there's also the transportation piece, and that accounts for about 20% overall of our energy use. So it's not the biggest piece, but it's certainly a relevant piece that we should be addressing. And actually, it's almost the biggest piece, because when I've looked at that, and if you recall my talk last time, all the other areas I could identify where the biggest thing is we need to be electrifying. Bottom line, we need to be electrifying everything and then making sure our electricity comes from renewables. That's kind of, in a nutshell, the overall strategy. But transportation is perhaps, in a way, the biggest nut to crack, because as you can see from this pie chart, there's so much of it is we use fossil fuels to drive our vehicles. So we have a long way to go. As Valdi mentioned, I think we're on the cusp, I believe, of a transition here as well. But we have a ways to go. So if you recall again, the steps that I outlined to a zero carbon footprint are these 8 steps. And I've already mentioned the recycling and composting. We need to change our eating habits. We need to change our supply companies, which is almost the easiest thing to do. And hopefully everybody has used their ability to decide where they get their electricity from an ESCO that wields renewables. Practicing energy conservation, and I should say this is not in any particular order of importance, We should be working on all these things together, and at the end of the day, we will have a zero carbon footprint, not only for ourselves, but for our societies as well. But energy conservation obviously is also a big piece there. Electrifying really everything in our home. And if you recall, when I gave this presentation, I kind of outlined the fact that for myself, the transportation was a complete embarrassment, because that was the one area that I live in the country. You need a car to do just about everything. And my car was an ICE car, an internal combustion engine car. But at the end of last year, I finally bit the bullet and purchased my Ford Mach E, which was an all-wheel drive, has a range of 230 miles in the summer, and we'll come back to this because in the winter time it's less, and we'll explain why that's so. But just up front, so you know, when you're looking at ranges that the car dealers give you, you have to take it somewhat with a grain of salt, because it is affected by temperature. So that's my Mach-E that I'm proud owner of, and yeah. So finally, I'm able to give that energy presentation without apologizing for my transportation. So just up front, most people really know this. There's types of electrified vehicles. And when I say electrified vehicles, there are out there, obviously, that you can either get a hybrid that you can plug in or not. And quite frankly, I don't recommend, if you're going the hybrid route, at least get a plug-in, because otherwise you're just kind of playing games. Okay, you can get a little more efficient, but without the plug-in ability, you're using gasoline to generate the electricity to run your car, which doesn't get you all that much. But I'd like to basically leave the thought at the end of this presentation that we really, your next car ideally will be an EV, because that really is the way to get you off of fossil fuels. So this is a cutaway of the Ford Mach-E, but they're generally pretty similar across the board, where you have one or two motors, power being your drivetrains on your front and rear axles. And then the battery pack actually, and I don't know of any configuration that is not this way in a vehicle. There may be one, but I'm not aware of it. Basically, they load the vehicles, the batteries down on the floor, which actually makes them very ideal for this climate. Like I said, these cars are wonderful in the wintertime, where you have the ideal situation where your weight is down low and it's evenly distributed between all four wheels. And these cars are a dream to drive in the wintertime. Talk a little bit about the inefficiency of ICE cars. Believe it or not, 80% of the energy we consume with internal combustion engines are lost. It's spread over a number of different processes that the cars have, but at the end of the day, internal combustion engine vehicles, ICE cars, are just very, very inefficient. That's the bottom line. So not only are we using fossil fuels, which we want to get away from, but we're using the fossil fuels in a very inefficient fashion. The only reason why because we used to, when vehicles were first starting out, there were electric vehicles, but they were quickly overshadowed by internal combustion engines because fuel was so cheap at the time, basically. But obviously, we're no longer in that era. Fossil fuels are running out or becoming harder to get, or we're just there's so much environmental degradation to get the fossil fuels. Just looking at natural gas, for instance, we used to be able to find pockets of natural gas. Those pockets of natural gas are no longer. We've run through them. So basically, we're doing really crazy stuff like fracking, which is a lot more detrimental to the environment. So the fossil fuel industry, by most accounts, we're coming to an end of an era, and we're really transitioning away from fossil fuels, and electric vehicles are part of that process. So again, like I said, it costs a lot less to operate electric vehicles. I'll grant you the upfront costs are more, but at the end of the day, and I'll have some charts to point this out, that basically over the lifetime of the vehicle, even if you're looking at economics, your better choice is going to be an EV. Kind of feeding into that is just the fact that there's so many moving parts in an internal combustion engine. Anytime you have moving parts, these are things that can go wrong. Electric vehicle has one moving part. The motor has one moving part. So there's far less maintenance associated with EVs. You also have this ability to called regenerative braking. Said the ICE cars are inefficient, but especially with the braking, when you think about it, when you're braking, you have spent energy to move the car forward, and then if you're when you're trying to slow it down or stopping, you're basically you're working against that inertia that you've already spent some fuel to move you. And a beautiful thing about EVs is it has the ability to capture that energy and pull it back into the batteries, so that energy is not lost. So actually, ironically, you can actually, in a short trip, if you're like in a higher elevation, you could actually have more miles available to you to run than you did when you left off, precisely because of this regenerative braking, and you're just capturing that energy. So, and along with the maintenance, the fact that even though it's they tend to be heavier vehicles, which would suggest that you might go through brakes faster, the fact that it's regenerative braking actually extends the life of the brakes and less brake dust, what have you. So I believe this is true. It certainly was true with my car, where they come with their own chargers, and that gives you the ability to, believe it or not, you could plug your car into a regular 110 outlet and charge your car in it. So in some sense, we talk about not having places to charge. In a way, there's a lot more opportunities to charge than there are gas stations. That said, obviously, if you're trying to charge your car on a 110 outlet, it's going to take some time. So what you see in the general EV infrastructure is DC fast chargers, which because the other factor, of course, is you don't want to spend days to recharge your car especially when you're on a road trip. That said, I'll just use the opportunity to say that when you're an EV owner, you could charge your car overnight, and basically you're starting out with a quote full tank of gas every morning. And there are very few times that you go anywhere near the ranges that these EVs get you in this day and age. So I'll come back that around anyway, but I just wanted to share with you that chargers are typically included in these cars so that you can charge just about anywhere. Like I've been at hotel rooms, hotels, they're starting to put chargers in, but I've charged my car at a hotel using a standard outlet that they use to plug in Christmas lights. So it's you have those situations. That said, the best thing for when you buy an EV is to actually install your home charger. A little more money, but not a lot. I paid a total of $250 to get a charger installed at my home that will charge me up overnight, no problem. Actually, it charges me up in a couple of hours. And as the infrastructure gets built out, these chargers will be available. Well, the idea is to get them just about everywhere. So all your parking lots will eventually have chargers that you could just charge your car at. Not there yet, but the day is coming. And then, of course, ideally, that electricity would come from solar panels, which mine does, by the way. So these, unfortunately, as we sit today, there's a number of different connections that is going to change over time. I'm pretty sure what I've been reading, they're going to coalesce around what's referred to here as the CCS charging connectors. But we'll see how that goes. But the bottom line, I think what will help a lot is having these chargers have a common connector to it. We're not there yet, but we're getting there. And then you might have heard the term level 1, which is again a common outlet. Level 2 is typically the 220. Mine is a 50 amp charger that does the trick for me. And then as far as the general infrastructure for travelers, you have DC fast chargers, which is not only has delivers more kilowatts per hour, but also delivers it as a DC current. That helps because if you're delivering AC to a car, then you're using the internal converter of the car to turn it into the DC current needed to charge the batteries, which slows down the process. Whereas the level 3 DC fast chargers is already delivering DC power, which permits you to charge at a much faster rate. And so typically, I could be down to like 30 miles and then charge up in a matter of 30 minutes. And I'm actually on the slow end of that scale now, because just within the year, this has improved tremendously. not only in the ability of the cars to receive the charge faster, but also the chargers out there are delivering a lot more. Actually, 150 kilowatt per hour is low now, and quite often you'll come across a 350 kilowatt hour charger. I should just say, as an aside, sometimes if your car doesn't have that ability to receive the charge in that speed, you're always dealing with the lowest common denominator of charge. So even if you're on a charger that theoretically can deliver 350 per kilowatt, if your car can't handle it that fast, it's going to charge at whatever charge speed that your car is designed to take. So that's something to look at when you're out shopping, to just kind of check that out and do comparison on how fast your car can be charged. So and actually, this is the slide that I'm got a little ahead of myself. How long does it take to charge? It depends on the car and the power of the charger. So and there are cars out there that you can get charged in 15 minutes. So this is the chargers. Another thing that's out there available to any EV owner is a lot of apps on your phone will identify where the chargers are. And more, and my car being one of them, I can basically plug in my destination. It has a built-in navigation system, and I plug in the destination. It takes stock of where I'm, what charge I'm starting at, and then figures out when I'll need the next charge and identifies where that charger station is, and it becomes part of your route. Automatically builds in the charger into your route. So it's almost seamless from a user standpoint on finding these chargers. I have this slide up here showing charging stations in our area, but obviously for me, I would never use these chargers because I can do all my daily tasks on the range that I have in my car. It's only on road trips that I'm looking at these types of apps or using my onboard navigation system to identify when and where I find my charger. So, and I will tell you up front, I have taken this car clear up and down the East Coast. I've been all the way down to Florida and all the way up to Maine. So literally the whole East Coast. And the East Coast already has the infrastructure to handle road trips for any EV user. And it seems to get better every time we set out for one of these trips. So this is only improving over time. The stickler would be like if you tried to do cross country, it's not impossible. I've seen actually YouTube videos of people documenting their treks cross country in EVs, and so it's certainly doable. You just have to do a little more planning behind it. But anywhere up and down the East Coast, they talk about range anxiety for new owners. The fear is they're going to run out of charge before they get to their destination. And I will just tell you that this is not a worry for any electric vehicle if you're traveling anywhere up and down the East Coast. So this is the, and and this is growing by leaps and bounds. So this is already an out-of-date map of Tesla supercharger network. And then you have this CCS DC fast charging network, which is even more than the Tesla's charging network at this point. But having said that, there's already a move. Tesla has already indicated that it is going to open up its charging networks to the general public, because they've actually been able to use general chargers for a good long time. So I think they're, for all kinds of reasons, it's going to be one network in the not too different future. I mentioned costs, and it's astounding, really, the savings. I hate to gloat about, because I know a lot of people still have ice cars and are paying a good chunk of change to power their vehicles. But this is a comparison. Actually 17 cents per mile for a gas car is actually on the good side. You can be paying a lot more than that with an electric vehicle on the road, because you do pay more on the road at a public charger. That figures out to be 10 cents, actually a little less now. I just noticed they're dropping in price for whatever reason. But at home, if you were to charge your car off like your regular home grid, that would only be 2 cents per mile. And then if you have solar on your home, well, then it's almost ridiculous. I have here 0.7, because I like to point out that with solar isn't free. There is an upfront cost for solar, but if you figure out over the lifetime of those solar panels, or not even the lifetime, just the warranted lifetime of a solar panel, I'm figuring for mine, I spend about a third of the cost of electricity than anybody else. And that's figuring about 0.7 cents a mile powering my car at my home. And just to underscore the fact that they've done studies that only 5% of trips of anybody driving a vehicle is over 40 miles. So any EV will get you through your daily routine with no worries about range at all. So electric vehicle benefits: much lower fuel and operating costs, no toxic gasoline fumes, little maintenance outside of tire rotation, things like that. Instant torque, just a word on that. Anybody who's even test drove an electric vehicle, it's the pickup on these things are amazing, and it really kind of makes it they're really fun to drive. And that just becomes, and just look from a safety standpoint, that power to get yourself out of situations is worth it right there. Much cleaner, and most of the, unlike gasoline, which we import a lot of, even if you look at fossil fuel generated electricity, all of that comes from US sources as opposed to foreign oil. So this is just quickly looking at the vehicle prices. I said up front, and as most people who looked at these tried to buy a vehicle, you may be You may have a little sticker shock at the beginning because they are more expensive than their equivalent ICE car. However, if you looked at it from a monthly cost basis, or certainly long over the lifetime of the vehicle, EVs tend to be cheaper. So just got to keep that in mind. So they're coming, as Valdi said. The trucks are starting to get into use, electric trucks. Buses are going electric. It would be really great, and if you ever have the opportunity, if you have any influence in your school districts, because it would be great if we got all our school buses, because that's all buses, such the stop and go the stop and go nature of running buses really lend itself well to improving the efficiency of a bus operation. Same with garbage trucks. Another connection to my other issue of zero waste. Anyway, what's the saying? The sales are up. Valdi has mentioned that, and growing exponentially. So the final pitch is, and I think you'll get it from the other two speakers, your next vehicle. I don't encourage anybody to, if you have a perfectly running ICE car, go with it, but your next vehicle should be an EV. Yeah. So I think that's I'm going to stop it there. As I've gone along here, I've tried to, well, I'll just say purchasing. Yes, I have to say I lucked out because even when I was in the market for it at the end of last year, I was hearing 6 months out. You order it, and then 6 months later, you get your vehicle. I lucked out. Somebody had backed out of a deal, and it turned out it was just the vehicle with all the things we were looking for. So I got it the next month and never looked back. I don't regret the. As a matter of fact, I could sell my vehicle today for more than I paid for it because the people are finally getting the word that the EVs are the way to go. So I think I'm going to actually stop and let my co-conspirators here talk a little bit about their experience. But I'll just say, again, having driven this all up and down the East Coast, it's been a dream to drive, fun to drive, and saving a lot of money because it was funny. Just as I bought the car, the gas prices just went crazy. So, Jack, do you want to? So, as I said, I got a Mach E. I looked at it, and all the reports, Edmunds and Consumer Reports, and I mean, give Tesla the credit or credit's due. They basically jump-started this market, and so they get kudos for that. That being said, Ford has been in the auto building business for a good long time. So body-wise and so forth, everybody was saying mine compares with a Tesla Model S, and it just seemed like a better deal. The other thing that going for it, the Ford was the incentives at the time, which I think Tesla's in line to get their incentives back. Anybody who has been following this, the previous incentives were after the car manufacturer sold a certain amount of vehicles, then they could no longer get incentives for the car. But I think that's going to change back again. So Teslas are obviously a very good vehicle, and they'll become more competitive again when you factor in all the incentives. So I'll end there. Jack, do you want to chime in?
Well, I'll try. It seems like much of what you said applies to Teslas. The one difference, I think, that maybe you just didn't mention it, is with the Teslas, they've been working on full self-driving, where you have to keep your hands on the wheel, but it can kind of do most of the driving for you. And that was one of the attractions that I was interested in. We've been snowbirds for the last 10 years, going down to the Atlanta area. And I wanted a car that could help with the driving. And that has, it's still got a long ways to go. It's not perfect by any means, but the beta version of the full self-driving does do an awful lot of the driving. It can see traffic signs and slow up when you get to a lower speed limit area. It can change lanes when it sees that the car ahead of you is going slower. So it tends to be a fairly safe car in my experience. Now, I understand there's a lot of controversy about that, and I don't want to argue those points, but that was one thing that we enjoyed about the Tesla. Another is that you can kind of talk to it. It listens to your verbal commands, and you've got a touch screen that you use for most of the controls, but once you learn the language, you don't need to use the touch screen all the time. The Tesla Model Y that we have, we got it in September of 2020, and it is the long-range version. It seems to accelerate plenty fast for me. There is a performance version that goes even faster, but I don't see a need for me to be able to go any faster than it can go. The range is 300 miles right now. And range is, as Chris said, it varies depending on how many hills you're going to go up, what the temperature is when you're driving, and what speed you're driving at. If you keep your speed down, you can go further between charging. And as Chris said, when you're on a long distance trip, the car figures out the course to get to your destination, and it will stop where when it's appropriate to do a charge. And in our experience, you can get charged up in 20 to 30 minutes with the Tesla superchargers. Usually I'm not ready to go that fast. I want to walk around a little bit, go in and get some snacks or whatever. And so the charging for me hasn't been a problem. When you buy a Tesla, you don't have a local dealer. And that's kind of makes it a little bit harder in the Binghamton area to get a Tesla. You can go to, we live in Pennsylvania, and we went down to Philadelphia to pick one up. We were looking for one, and they had one available, and then we got it in 2 or 3 weeks, I think. There's also, if you're in the New York section, you can go up to Rochester, or I think there's a dealer in Albany, probably around New York City, there's several. But dealers are not real handy in the Binghamton area. But again, you don't need much in the way of service. Where we go in the south near Atlanta, there's a lot of Teslas, and there are service centers there. So that worked out fairly well, taking it to Georgia. And the reason we got the Model Y, it was the least expensive of the cars that had the space to take all of our stuff for the winter. We do travel with a dog and a couple cats, and we needed the space that the Y has as compared to the Model 3, which I don't think has the same capacity. I think I'll stop now and let Larry Blumberg talk about his car.
I'll just chime in with one point that actually I refrain from the, well, we really can't say that it drives itself. They talk more in terms, I mean, Tesla tried to say it drove itself at the beginning, but they've had to back away from that. So now everybody talks about driver assist, and the federal government finally stepped in and actually came up with a 1 to 5 rating system, on 5 being a true autonomous driving vehicle. Everybody is basically at 2 or 3 at this juncture. And actually, it's not limited. That technology is not limited to EVs anymore either. They've put them on the higher end ICE cars as well. So, but as Jack says, it's wonderful, especially on those long trips. I can basically take my hands off the wheel, and this is more on the 4-lane roads, especially. I could literally go from, once I hop on the highway, down to Florida without, if I'm happy with staying at the speed of whatever vehicle is in front of me, I wouldn't have to intervene at all. I tend to drive a little faster, so I basically make that conscious decision. Well, I want to pass this guy who's going a little too slow for me, but actually it's actually even more helpful. Not that we have a lot of bumper to bumper traffic in this neck of the woods, but bumper to bumper traffic, you can almost read a book while it deals with that traffic headache. The only thing I found is it's not very polite, because if it actually regulates, if you're going at a high speed, it puts more distance between you and the car in front of you, and then when you're down to super slow, it comes up to the car in front of you. So if there's a car in the other lane that wants to shift over for whatever reason, that's another time I have to intervene, and because my car is not very light. But anyway, Larry.
Well, my wife Susan and I have a Chevy Bolt, the EUV model, which is their SUV version, a small compact SUV version of the Chevy Bolt itself. Both models, the Bolt and the EUV Bolt, are really very similar. Our experience has been very similar to what you and Jack have described in terms of a great car to drive. Regenerative braking really enhances the experience driving a electric vehicle. I've heard people say that it's like driving a golf cart. I've never driven a golf cart, so I can't confirm, but you're shaking your head, Chris. So
Yes,
maybe
it's
that'll give people
one pedal driving.
right. We do use our vehicle strictly in town. We have yet to take it on a road trip. We do all of our charging at home. We do have solar panels, and this is a not a warning, but something you must consider. In the wintertime, the solar panels just don't produce enough electricity to keep up with charging the car. So we are having to purchase electricity from the grid in order to keep up with charging the car. That said, there are some background things. We've converted a lot of our house from natural gas over to electric. And so we're with the electric vehicle in the wintertime, we'd exceed the capacity of our solar panels. Just something to keep in mind. Another thing that we did with our house was increase the amperage service coming into the house from 150 amp to 200 amp. Again, that was in anticipation of converting as much as we could from gas to electricity. So that's another thing to consider when taking on an electric vehicle and charging at home is, do you need to increase your service to your home? The best advice I would give you in terms of when you talk to a dealer about purchasing the vehicle, the purchase process is the same, whatever type of vehicle you're purchasing, but you do want to get into a very detailed discussion about the charging of the vehicle. And I don't believe the Chevy Bolt is capable of receiving a fast charge. I don't know that for a fact, but from what I've read and what I believe the dealer told me was that you're limited to the level 2, the 220 volt. I find the numbers to be very similar for level 1, level 2 that Chris had in his presentation. On 110 volt, we would get about 4 miles an hour. And on the 220 line, which we have had installed in the house, we're getting about 25 miles per kilowatt hour, or per hour, I'm sorry.
Larry, I think it does do the high-speed charging.
It does.
If you've got 2 connectors there, you got that round one, then you got the DC one below that.
Okay. Yes.
Right. So you have to go to a charger that's got that, but they do have both of them there.
Okay,
But
that's good.
I think the point is, and Larry's underscored it, you do have to find out what your vehicle is capable of, because it's always limited to the lowest common denominator, if you will. If your car can't receive the high capacity, it just won't. It won't accept it. So, like, I'm limited to even though there's 350 kilowatt hour fast chargers out there, I can only take advantage. The highest I can take is the 250. So and that affects the charge time. So as Larry's pointing out, you just have to, be aware of your own driving habits. As Jack said, and I totally concur. Of course, we're both retired, but when we go on road trips, actually our routine has always been we drive 2 hours, we stop, stretch, go restroom break or whatever, and that totally fits in with the charge times that we need to do a long distance trip. But if you're looking for something faster, there are cars out there that accept the faster charge. So you just need to be aware of what you're buying, what you want, and make sure you get what you want. I guess the only other thing I forgot to mention, like I've been spending 40 years avoiding Walmarts. And unfortunately, at least in my trip down to Florida, I found a lot of the charging stations were at Walmarts. So they finally got me to go into a Walmart, at least to go to the restroom anyway.
One of the key numbers, at least the Chevy hits you over the head with while you're driving, is how many miles you are getting per kilowatt hour. And typically, as an average, I'll say we get about 4 miles per kilowatt hour. And then you look at what is the size of the battery. In our case, the battery is 65 kilowatt hours size. So 65 times 4 gives us our range, the range of somewhere in the neighborhood of 250. Now we only charge up to 80% of the full charge, not the 100%. That's mandated by GM at the moment because of the issues they've had with the fires, the battery fires. And until they replace our battery with a new battery, they have us only charging to 80%. So 80% of 65 kilowatt battery means we charge it up to 50 kilowatt hours, and then we get 4 miles a kilowatt hour times 50 is 200 miles. So that's what our typical range is. And as has been pointed out, depending on the type of driving you're doing, you can do a little better than that. But in the wintertime and on a road trip where you're going 65 miles an hour, you'll do considerably less than that. The cold weather really does affect the battery performance and the faster speeds. The fact you're not getting any regenerative braking when you're flying down an interstate highway, it does reduce your overall range. So I'm seeing a little bit more variation around the range than what Chris had reported. But I'd be interested, Chris and Jack, do you see those numbers? Does the number 4 miles per kilowatt hour mean anything to you? Or do you have something equivalent to that with your vehicle?
Yeah, but as you pointed out, though, the other factor in the wintertime is you're actually using electricity to heat your car. So what I have found, whereas my car is rated 230 mile range, it drops 40 miles over the wintertime to 190. So you just gotta be aware of that.
Yeah.
But again, the cars are so smart, they calculate that all in. That's the other thing they take account of, the temperature outside and actually your driving habits. When they calculate the range and when you're going to need the next charger, all that is part of their algorithm to figure out when you're going to need the next charge.
I'd like to ask Bruce Chamberlain. I know he just purchased a new Chevy Bolt, and he lives way out in the country and undoubtedly has to drive more than 40 miles a day on average. How are you making out with charging on the road with your vehicle?
Well, I haven't done it yet.
Oh, okay.
I haven't. I bought my car in Rochester and I drove it back from Rochester, and so I've been charging at home on 110 right now because Larry, I'm moving, right? So I didn't want to put the fast charger in this little cabin. I want to put it in the final house, right?
Okay.
So we're supposed to close on Friday and then we'll put the charger in there. But it works great for us because when you go on you plug it in overnight, it charges up overnight and you already got a full tank of gas ready to go the next day. So we haven't had any problem with that yet.
Good.
So I looked it up as we were talking. You can charge, the Bolt goes up to 100 miles charged in a half an hour. That's a fast charge rate.
With the fast charger. Okay.
So
And
I
then
want to tell
there's-
you, funny thing real quick. The one time I wanted to just try it, there was a PetSmart. They had a charger outside, and I wanted to try it. So I pull into the spot. They had 2 spots, 2 chargers, but only one charger had a cord. And the other one was plugged into a car charging. So I didn't get to try it. Yeah.
I want to mention there's some comments, questions in the chat. Do we want to look at those now? I mean, Larry, were you
Sure.
done? You want to say?
Yeah. I'm finished with my comments.
Well, let's just go to the chat. First one, I'll read it, and Andy, you can add to it if you want, but you said, please comment on potential for vehicle to grid and also potential to use your EV battery for powering your house during power outages. And Mark, I think you replied to this when you said Teslas do not support this, right?
Yeah, and
Teslas do not support the powering your house.
yeah, neither does mine. It's my understanding that the Ford Lightning is set up to do that.
I think
And
that's the only one.
also,
And I think you'll see more of that coming forward because I would dearly love it too. That's one of the frustrations of my of our solar system is when the power is out, I can't take advantage of the sun. So I'm either going to have to I think at the end of the day the answer is going to be to get a power pack. But
I believe that Volkswagen and Hyundai already have models that support vehicle to grid, and potentially vehicle to your house. And those batteries hold a lot of power, instead of having to have some kind of Tesla power wall or battery located in your house. The idea of using the car sounds pretty cool.
Yeah.
But think about it, the car is pulling 30 amps to charge up and it can supply 30 amps back. 30 amps doesn't go very far on a house. You need more for a range or for water heater or dryer or anything like that.
Well,
on the other hand, if you can just use them to keep your solar panels running, then you got a different story.
Yes, but you can power lights and your TV. Of course, no one's broadcasting then, but you can power a few things. Just don't expect heavy appliances to work.
And what most people start worrying about when they have a storm power outage is your refrigerator and freezer and keeping your food, cold. And it can certainly do that. So
Yeah, those are low draws.
right. Yep. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. So they can be useful. So if you are considering one of these vehicles, that's just thing to keep in mind that you might want to think about. But there's many other things to think about too. And there's the technology of the batteries and how the batteries are packaged, how they are cooled. Some earlier cars didn't even have liquid cooling to moderate the temperature of the battery packs, and some of those cars started to have troubles, especially if you're living in the Southwest where you've got temperatures that now, I think in the Phoenix area, that this past summer, they were 22 days during the summer, the high temperature was higher than 110 degrees Fahrenheit. And if you're on the road, especially if it's an asphalt road in the middle of a city that's baking in the hot sun, the area immediately above that pavement could be 130 very easily. So if a battery pack is air cooled and you're sitting in stop and go traffic in the middle of that city, you might end up really stressing those batteries. So that's another thing to keep in mind is, especially if you're buying a used electric vehicle, which now the Inflation Reduction Act is going to be providing tax rebate incentives for even purchasing a used electric vehicle. So check out what those parameters are. Some of those rebates or incentives that the government provides they're limited by your income level, as well as the price of the car. And also, as Scott mentioned in the chat, new vehicles definitely are limited. They're incentivizing American content of both the manufacturing of the mechanics of the car, the body of the car, the electronics, as well as the sourcing of the materials for the batteries too. So they're trying to incentivize more US production. So definitely check out what the rules are for the federal level incentives, because those incentives are getting much better now that the Inflation Reduction Act was passed late August this year. And also what the state level incentives are, because that can make a big difference and that can really bring down that initial purchase price much closer to what an internal combustion engine vehicle might be in terms of your initial purchase price. And as the owners mentioned, in the long run, you're going to end up saving money. And one thing that wasn't mentioned, because most of these modern electric vehicles now have liquid cooling, you also have to, as part of their maintenance, I'm sure there's a requirement after so many years to change out that fluid. It's a water antifreeze mixture, polyethylene glycol, similar to what's in an internal combustion engine's radiator. So that's a similar thing. It's maybe a larger quantity in terms of total fluid, and you're still going to have, you might have a gear oil at whatever the driving wheels are. There might be a reduction gear between the electric motor, which is very high speed spinning, down to the speed of the wheels themselves. So there's probably gear oil that periodically would need to be changed. This isn't any different than an internal combustion engine car, but basically there is some maintenance that still needs to be done. And I also spoke to my local mechanic who we've used for decades now. And I said, well, hey, if we buy a Tesla or an electric vehicle, can you do the typical routine maintenance on those things? And he said, sure, it's going to be brakes and cooling fluid and some gear oil, and they can handle that stuff. So just because there isn't an electric vehicle dealer repair place near you doesn't mean that you can't do the routine maintenance on those vehicles. So that's another thing to keep in mind. Don't let that scare you off.
Right. I believe the Tesla batteries are air cooled, not water.
No, they're
Water cooled?
they're liquid cooled. They've got ribbon cooling that goes in between the batteries. I've been following Tesla very closely, so I know how those things are built.
Moving on to the chat, Matt Wahila said they have new DC fast chargers on Washington Street in Binghamton. He believes they're free for the time being. A good place to check out EV chargers and see how they work.
Yeah, it's funny. Yeah, I can still, every now and again, I still run across free charging. I don't expect that to last forever, but it's nice while you can get it. The welcome centers in New York State all have free fast charging. Yeah.
That's nice. And another thing I wanted to mention too, Chris mentioned that just heating the car and defrosting the windows of the car does draw some energy, and that's coming from the battery pack in an electric vehicle rather than from the waste heat from an internal combustion engine car. But some newer electric vehicles are using heat pumps now. So just as homes, people are encouraging homes heating to switch over to using air source heat pumps. A car can't use a geothermal heat pump, but they can certainly use an air source heat pump. And many of these vehicles now are starting to use air source heat pumps. So that improves the efficiency, which means that you're drawing some heat out of the air rather than taking all of the energy out of the battery pack. So that improves the range that you would get in the wintertime. And so that's another thing to look for if you're purchase or looking into buying a new or maybe even a used electric vehicle. Ask if it's got an air source heat pump for conditioning the cabin air and for defrosting the windows and that type of thing.
But by the way, since we're on the subject, I'll just share the fact that a lot of these, at least my vehicle, and I'm sure most of them, I can start the vehicle from my cell phone, and I can have it preheat, the seats heat, the steering wheel heats up, all while it's still on the charger. So it's not, it doesn't affect the range starting out anyway, which is all good. It's good strategy, especially in the wintertime. And, you know, I know a lot of cars have self-starters now, but you don't want to have that in your garage. You don't want to have an internal combustion engine running in your garage, but that's not an issue with an EV. So it's really nice. Also, see how they work. The other feature is these. Well, it depends on the vehicle, but Ford and I'm sure Tesla, with at least within its own network, it recognizes the car. So basically, you plug into the charger, and it recognizes your car and just automatically charges your account. It's even a lot simpler than the exchange when you fill up your car with gas. So.
Another comment from Andy Perry. This is insightful and sort of the big picture. While EVs are great, it seems like we are heading for a world with less cars. Once ICE is banned for new cars in 2035, the net effect will be that fewer people will be able to afford them. The future would appear to be more about public transportation and a less car-centric way of life. In my honest opinion, this will be a major change. Good point, Andy. A good few points there.
Yeah. I would agree. You know, one of the things that I had against working against me, and I know it's Jack as well, is we live in rural areas, so you just can't be without a car, and that's why one of the reasons why I was anxious to get into an EV.
Yeah, I know we have other EV owners out there. Anybody else want to
We have a
chime
couple of
in?
hand raised too.
Oh, I didn't see those. Oh, we should do that. Okay, sorry. Who's got their hands raised?
Christina would have been first, because I think they put it in the order of their hand raised.
I think Christina may have been first.
Yes, Christina.
Hi, everyone. Thank you guys so much for giving this presentation. I feel like electric vehicles to me are still like so alien, but I know they shouldn't be. And so I'm just glad that you guys are like sharing your actual experiences, because I'm finding it really helpful and informative. I did just want to say that Julian Shepard also said in the chat that he'd like to make a few comments. Just wanted to raise that. But my question was, what happens like if for overnight charging at home, what happens if it gets done charging before morning or before you wake up to like unplug it? Because I know Larry mentioned the issue with the fires getting when some models get to 100%. So I'm just wondering about that.
They
Yeah.
shut off.
They
They
shut
stop
off.
They
charging.
do.
And yeah, I think after the initial problems with the fires, they've done some changes. So typically, I'll just share my thing. We'll typically charge to 90%. It used to be 80, now it's 90, because Ford at least seems to have a lot of extra battery power that they're not even revealing. For whatever reason. So you can safely, you can bring it up to 90 pretty fast. Then it starts slowing down because then it becomes a matter of leveling off all the batteries in your system. So it does drop, the charge rate does drop after 90%. But if I know I'm going on a car trip the next day, I just tell through my phone to just charge up to 100%. It's as easy as that. And then it stops after it reaches 100%. It's all governed automatically.
Okay. I was gonna ask if you could like tell it basically, if you could vary it, like say I want it to shut off after 90 or 95 or 100 or something.
I can set it wherever I want it to be honest.
Okay. Is it like more for the battery life and taking care of the battery? Is it better to shut it off at 90 or?
That's what they're telling me. I think that's true across the board that
Okay.
just in terms of battery life, if you don't charge them up 100% all the time, you're better off.
Okay.
Because
Thank you.
They didn't warn me about that. I just assumed you go to 100%. And mine, it says that the bolt, it says that it keeps the battery at the right temperature. So it might stop charging, but it's going to keep the battery warm if it's cold out, or keep the battery cool if it's hot out. So you're ready to go when you want to go.
And Karen
Might
Goodman had a
also make it a
question.
nice- That might also make it a nice place for a squirrel to hang out, you know?
Yeah,
Karen, what do you got?
Well, I want to hear what Julian has to say about the EV footprint of manufacturing the cars and the batteries. He had it in chat and he wanted to talk, and I just want to make sure he got the chance to ask those questions.
Well, I'll just say, and I'll let the others chime in, that I think we have to be just as vigilant because we all remember the so-called battery recycling plant that was being proposed in Endicott. And my feeling is we have to, I think there's safe ways to recycle these batteries, but not by incinerating them, that's for sure. But bottom line is just because it has the EV label to it, I think we have to be just as vigilant on the environmental effects. Bottom line, I don't think EVs should get a free pass just because they do away with fossil fuels. So.
Go ahead, Julian. If you have more to add, go ahead.
Yeah, could I please? First of all, let me say that I'm not a big fan of ICE cars. In fact, I'm very fortunate living in the city to be able to do all my personal transportation, most of it by bicycle. But what we should consider is the whole life history of electric cars. And there are some downsides in its manufacturing. One of it is the very great dependence, of course, on lithium. And lithium supplies are okay now, but they are limited. And they're being mined in places like the Atacama Desert in Chile, where they use huge amounts of water, and they're actually ruining a lot of that ecosystem. So we need to consider that. Cobalt is also a major component. I'm not quite sure where that comes in. I'm not good enough engineer to know that, but apparently 70% of the world's cobalt comes from Congo, and where it is largely mined by sort of subsistence miners, and which is very environmentally destructive. So we need to consider that too. There's also the fact that people want to make electric cars as light as possible, I presume because of the heavy batteries. And apparently that requires more input into their manufacture in the form of energy and water. So once again, we need to consider the whole life history of EV. I read an article not long ago in a reputable magazine which said that really the environmental costs are not paid off until you get up to about 40,000 miles on a car. And if you're not going to use it for that length, it's not really, you don't get that benefits, which you've been talking about so eloquently. But we need to consider these issues too.
Yeah.
That has kind of gotten away from me, but someone else was saying something.
Well, I was just saying you won't get any argument from me, and like I said, I'll go further and say just basically that's the one thing we have to be leery of as we go forward. That we've seen it in a lot of different situations where supposedly something is. We need to hold EV manufacturing to the same standards as we hold everything else.
One thing I want to add to this conversation is my background is chemical engineering, and I've been paying attention to the EV world for many years now. And Dr. Matt Wahila, who's been contributing some comments on the chat, can add to this too, because he's actually been doing some research at Binghamton University on batteries. Is overall, please don't go away with the idea that you have to be afraid of electric vehicles because of the chemistry that's inside the vehicles in terms of the battery packs and what it takes to produce those batteries, to mine the raw materials and to produce those, because there are many very bright people who are working on reducing the environmental footprint, to streamline the manufacturing process, to come up with new methods of making these cars, simplifying the parts count so that there's less trouble with these cars in terms of making them more reliable, making the cars last longer. The inherently electric motors are very efficient, as Chris Berger mentioned right from the beginning. So electric vehicles have a huge advantage right from the physics standpoint of, instead of wasting about 70% of every drop of gasoline or diesel fuel that you burn in an internal combustion engine vehicle, 70% of that roughly dissipates as heat that does no good for anybody. And those things produce lots of pollution. And that pollution is not just what comes out of the tailpipe, but if we're going to hold electric vehicle manufacturers accountable for their entire life cycle, from the start of the mining of everything that goes into that and the processing of all that and recycling at the back end, you also have to consider the entire fossil fuel footprint as well, which is horrendous. And one of the big things that, I'm going to bring this up again, because that's one of the key things we've been focusing on at the Susquehanna Group is climate change is our biggest threat that we're facing on the entire planet. And we cannot stay on internal combustion engine powered vehicles if we hope to save a habitable climate. And that's beyond all the deaths that we're causing from all the pollution that comes from the entire fossil fuel production, from wellhead or mine through to transporting it, processing it, and then using it and burning it. Yes, we've made the pollution control systems on internal combustion engine vehicles better over many decades, but it's still not perfect. And I want to bring it up again because I hammer this anytime I get the chance. Your gasoline tank and diesel tank has benzene in it. and it has other carcinogens in it. Benzene is allowed to be in gasoline at 0.6% by volume on average by EPA. It's grandfathered in. So anytime you fill up at a gasoline station and those fumes are wafting and the air is drifting in your direction and you're not holding your breath, you're breathing in benzene right into your lungs and it's going into your bloodstream. That's a carcinogen. And so it's a powerful carcinogen. You're not allowed to use this at home. You can't buy benzene and just use this at home and just spray it all over your house, but it's in your, if you're keeping a car in your garage, some of that is possibly leaking onto the floor, and maybe the emission control system that's supposed to recapture all those vapors isn't working properly. So those fumes might be leaking into your airspace in the garage too, and that might be coming into your house slowly, and you don't possibly not even aware of it. So I just wanted to mention that. So EVs are going to keep getting better. They're going to keep getting more efficient. The chemistries are going to keep getting better. They're going to reduce the chance of fires, and the processing of the batteries and the chemistries are going to keep getting better. The range is going to get better. The charging speed is going to get better. The environmental footprint is going to get better. So all of this is going to get better, and our grid is going to get better. It's going to get more reliant on renewable energy. So whereas internal combustion engine cars, the more that we continue to use those, that means you're just prolonging the agony of staying on the fossil fuel system. So thank you.
The only thing I'll circle back on, maybe a small comparison to what you were mentioning, Valdi, was the braking, the regenerative braking, and the cutting down of asbestos dust that gets created by all our braking is yet another factor, maybe small in comparison, but.
Yeah.
We're at the 9 o'clock hour, but Matt Mohila, you're still out there. Did you want to get into the chemistry? You have something in the comments I think we would like to hear you talk about.
Oh, yeah, I'm still here if you want me to talk.
Sure.
So, I mean, I could give a whole lecture about it, but I'll try and, I guess, be brief. So cobalt that everyone always brings up, that is common in today's EV batteries. Most of them, especially in the US, use this NCA chemistry, which is nickel, cobalt, aluminum. So the majority of the batteries made of nickel, cobalt, with a little bit of aluminum in there to stabilize the structure of the cathode material. But cobalt has a lot of problems. One, I mean, obviously the whole toxicity and the mining issue, but it's also very expensive. So companies like Tesla especially have been looking to replace it for a while. And Tesla did recently, because the price of cobalt has risen so much, they were forced to switch over to this lithium iron phosphate chemistry in their batteries in China. And so that we're probably going to see a lot more vehicles with lithium iron phosphate in the coming years, just because it's a lot cheaper and it's actually more stable because of the phosphate group included in there. The structure is a lot more stable than the NCA. So the batteries last a lot longer. The reason people haven't used it so far is just capacity wise. It's a lower capacity material than the NCA. So when they were pushing the last couple of years to increase range, to try and entice consumers to switch to EVs, they kind of shied away from anything that would reduce the range of a vehicle at all. But I think now now there's enough charging stations where range anxiety isn't as big of a deal for some people. So now you might start seeing some more sort of economy EVs that are going to these different chemistries. But I mean, there's
lower cost too, Matt.
Yeah. So it's a lot lower cost material. You're not using cobalt and other rarer materials. Lithium iron phosphate, it's just iron, phosphorus, oxygen, and lithium. So it's very inert. It's not toxic, and it's very cheap to make. It's just, like I said, it's a lower capacity battery, so you don't get the same range that you would get. But it's been used more prevalently in like grid storage, where you could have like a bigger battery and it doesn't really matter so much. In EVs though, they tried to find the best chemistry they could to make the batteries as small as they could. But there's a lot of innovations happening in battery chemistry still. They've been looking at some higher capacity materials at Binghamton University last couple of years. So they've been trying to find cathode materials where you could squeeze more than one lithium into each unit cell of the structure. So you could essentially double the capacity of your battery in a given volume. And there's also people looking into things like solid state batteries, which would pretty much eliminate the fire risk, and also potentially make them smaller, more compact, because you could essentially strip out that whole electrolyte fluid component of your battery, which would actually be a huge innovation. The only issue with those batteries so far is just the charging rate, the charging and discharge rate, I should say. Getting energy into and out of them so far is not the best. They're still trying to develop materials that improve that. But if anyone has any more questions, I could keep talking, but I guess.
And the recycling and recovery technologies are improving as well, aren't they?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's lots of new, especially now that EVs are really taking off. There's a lot of companies that are trying to get into the space now, that have been developing different ways to deal with batteries, and hopefully, if we could get more, I really think the federal government should maybe step in, just to standardize battery packs a little more. That would make recycling easier, because how it is at the moment, it's like every manufacturer kind of has their own battery pack technology. So they're not really interchangeable, and then recycling becomes an issue because however this company put together their battery pack may be completely different from this company, and so stripping them apart and getting the materials out becomes difficult. But there are strides in that area, and there's lots of new processes, different chemical processes and whatnot to sort of dissolve out the battery materials, and then you could precipitate those materials out of solution and get the sort of raw salts back out that you can then use to produce brand new batteries with really high efficiency, because it's a sort of chemical process like that. But yeah, it's a really interesting field, and there's lots of innovations happening all the time. I mean, who knows, in like 2 years, it could be a completely different ball game in terms of what materials exist and what people are doing. So.
I was scrolling down through the chats, and I think I may have already answered this with how do you pay for the charging outside your home, and it's easier than at a gas station. You still have the ability, if you want, to charge it to your car. It has those kiosks built into those chargers, but a lot of most of the time, it has the ability to recognize your car. You've already linked it to an account, so it's easy as plugging it in and then unplugging it and going.
Yeah, and I'm going to add something else too. There's other sources of lithium as well, and there's rock too, not just salts that you can precipitate lithium out of. So people are developing mines in Western Australia. There's it's called spodumene. It's the hard rock type of ore that has a high concentration of lithium in it. There's some of this in southeastern United States as well, and it's also in the deserts of the U.S. Southwest. And they're reactivating nickel deposit mines in North America as well. So there's the new incentives from the federal government, as well as just the price of these things and the demand going up. Companies were already looking into this. So overall, what I'm trying to get at is, as time goes on, our reliance on foreign sources for this, especially from places that might not be so friendly or so reliable to the United States or even other Western nations, for many of these things, we're going to end up being able to get away from those few places where now it's maybe environmentally problematic, or maybe the government isn't very stable, and maybe they don't treat their workers very well, or they don't have good environmental regulations, or they're just potentially hostile to Western nations. This is going to improve as we develop other sources and other processing methods for these things. So, and that's for the components that go into the electric motors, as well as the batteries. And somebody mentioned on a comment that, well, in 10 years, depending on how fast you charge and how far you drive, maybe the batteries are going to start to lose some of their capacity. And that's true. But that doesn't mean that after 10 years or 100,000 miles or whatever, that you won't be able to drive this car anymore. It just means that the range will be less, and maybe you'll get a little bit less money for it on the used market. But even if the range drops to 50%, which might be at 250,000 miles or something, or maybe 20 years of driving, there's always a second use for these batteries too, to help support the grid, because there, it doesn't matter if you have a super compact battery. If you have a battery that takes 50% less charge, you just have more of them. So you build extra concrete pads that hold more of these things, and these steel enclosures. So there's a potential use for supporting grid scale energy storage too, for like a second use for these batteries before they even have to be recycled chemically to recover their raw materials. And
actually, that seems to be where a lot of them are heading for a reuse purpose. These storage that we're going to need more of on the grid itself.
So basically, we're at still the early stages of this technology. You know, when you consider how far this has come since basically around 2010, when Tesla started to really work on this idea and reinvigorate electric vehicles after GM tried it way back in I think the early 90s. They had some vehicles out. EV1, I think, was their model that they had out for a while, but it wasn't successful. Battery technology wasn't quite as good as it is now, nowhere near as good. And Tesla, when they introduced the Model S, I think it was 2012, that was really a game changer. So this technology, including what Jack Davis mentioned and Chris talked about too, with this driver assist or moving towards self-driving technology, these keep getting better and better. Now some of these vehicles you can walk out of whatever you're doing, a restaurant or shopping or whatever, and as you're walking out of the building, you can use your phone and you can have the vehicle actually move from the parking lot by itself and meet you at the front door. It's called Summon, SUMMON. And now they're also introducing self-parking, so it can drop you off at the front door, and then you tell it, okay, go find your own parking spot. The car finds its own parking spot, doesn't hit anybody, doesn't hit any other car. It gently drives into a parking spot and sits there. So then when you leave again, you can either find where the parking lot is from your application on your phone, or you can have the thing drive to you, pick you up at the front door. So, and eventually, I'm getting older too. I've got eye trouble. Some people have other disabilities that might prevent them from driving. And if you don't have access to public transportation, eventually these vehicles will drive themselves. So you can go to have it take you to a doctor's appointment. You can have it take you on a vacation to visit your relatives that are hundreds of miles away, and you don't have to worry about it. So that time will come. There's many companies that are working on this problem. It's a difficult problem to solve, but humans can drive with just their eyes and their ears and their hands and feet. And you can make actuators that do the steering, that actuate the brakes, and vision systems and processing power are getting so good now that eventually vehicles will be able to do this. They're close to doing it now.
My car parks faster than I do because it can calculate all the angles a lot it parks itself already. We're there already. It's pretty amazing. I wish actually it would go a little slower. It freaks me out. But just I just on this point though, we're talking about how fast it's all changing. I think it should be said though, this is almost like where the computers are, they continue to be. And you might be tempted to say, well, I'll wait just a little bit because it's going to be so much better in just like 6 months to a year. And I'll just say that if you followed that with a computer, you'd never buy a computer, right? So it's just best, when you need a new vehicle, get your EV. Yeah, it's going to be better a year from now, but I wouldn't let that hold you back to buying an EV.
Good point. Good point, Chris. Does anybody else have any questions or comments?
Well, it's been a pleasure as always, folks.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Thank you.
appreciate all you EV owners helping us understand more. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very
I
much.
appreciated this.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for Matt, for you chiming in too.
Yeah.
I know that we kind of put you on the spot there, but there's a lot happening locally too here at Binghamton University, as well as the spinoff company Imperium 3 New York. And with their win of the New Energy New York project. So there's lots of good things coming, and it means jobs too. It's cleaner air, cleaner water, safer streets, quieter streets, more jobs, and savings, and saving a habitable climate, saving lives too. So all of this fits together, and it's all moving in the right direction. So this is a good news story in so many ways. So thank you again to Chris Berger, to Larry Blumberg, as well as Jack Davis for sharing your experiences. And thank you to everybody in the audience for your time and your attention tonight. And I hope this makes you feel better next time you consider purchasing a vehicle.